This is Aidan Jonah, Editor-in-Chief of the Canada Files. With the recent indictment coming out of the United States, well, the killing of Hardeep Nijjar is truly, well, it always should have been on the radar, but it's really back in the public's radar now. So to learn some more about this and to provide another perspective on it, Canada Files is speaking with Mo Dhaliwal, CEO of Skyrocket Digital and an activist based out of British Columbia. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us. So I want to start with so that people can get to know you better. So I think hashtag Ask India Why is probably a good place to start there. So if there's really an incident that catapulted your name to the world stage, it was hashtag Ask India Why and the Poetic Justice Foundation's toolkit being shared by Greta Thunberg back in 2021. So how did the Indian government and media respond to public knowledge of the toolkit, and what exactly was in that?
Yeah, I mean, the surprising thing for us was, just a really, violent response that, not Canadian, Indian authorities and Indian media had towards that document because it was quite innocuous, right? It was the sort of thing that we produce in democracies all the time, right? It was organized information. It had some messages in there and key messages on what we're protesting and why, and how to spread the word and engage others in that movement. So for democracies, it's a very innocuous document. There was nothing really there that was particularly harmful in any way, but it was portrayed as being some very clandestine and hateful campaign by Indian media.
Yes, I found the thing itself, and it certainly it reminds me of exactly what the kind of thing that would be put around Palestine, around Indigenous solidarity in Canada. You would think from the hype that this was a document teaching people how to conduct assassinations. So
Yeah, and the other thing that was surprising was that the entire thing was done in plain sight, right? Because again, for us, this was a very innocuous activity. So everything from the deck itself, it had our signature. It said it was produced by myself of Poetic Justice Foundation. The website had links back to us, so all of this information was perfectly available and public, frankly, because we were doing it in plain sight. But it was treated as if it was the uncovering of some again really heinous details through some deep investigative reporting, which it was not at all, right? This is all quite public and widely available.
all right, so how'd you get through that moment? I know like there was an impact in terms of, if I remember correctly, there was one activist that was even arrested around, if I'm remembering correctly from the Georgia Straight article back in 2021.
Yeah, so in India, there were actually multiple activists, connected to us that were arrested. The unfortunate thing is that only one activist really got the notoriety, and that was Disha Ravi, because she's a young woman from a high caste BJP supporting family, and the BJP are, India's dominant party. And so, her arrest and the subsequent, court case was really meant to, I believe, was really meant to send a signal to other, BJP families and parents of, young people that might be protesting or active, or, some of what was going on in India at the time. And the signal was meant to just chill any sort of protest, any sort of dissent that might exist. So hers was the widely publicized case, but she was one of many people that was arrested.
All right, so let's speak about the Poetic Justice Foundation. Since
Mhm.
its founding, what work has it taken on, and what impact do you think it's managed to have?
Yeah, so our work is primarily in working on anti-racism and anti-casteism projects in Canada. And so, by all means, the farmers' protest was probably our largest foray into anything international, even though that's not really our core focus. But we got involved in that because of its, diasporic implications to the Punjabi Sikh community here. Since then, we've run workshops, events, programming, essentially, providing education and tools around race and how it shows up in the South Asian community in Canada, as well as how caste as a violent structure of social oppression continues to rear its ugly head, even outside of the subcontinent and in communities like Vancouver, Surrey, other places in Canada.
All right, so shifting back towards the core focus, in a Georgia Straight article from 2021, it actually said you coined the slogan "Love and Courage" for NDP politician Jagmeet Singh's federal party leadership bid in 2017. What did you take away
Mm-hmm.
from Jagmeet Singh's victory then, and how have you felt about his public stances, statements on India so far?
Yeah, so I mean, his victory was a real, I think, moment of validation for us because we had never seen, frankly, ourselves, in such a prominent position of leadership, right? I think Canada does a lot to generally sort of pat itself on the back for its multiculturalism and diversity. But that multiculturalism and diversity seldom represents any major shift in the power balance that exists between whiteness and white power structures and the rest of us. And so that campaign and his subsequent win as party leader of the NDP, to me, represented a pretty fascinating shift. Right, it's one of the few occasions where some power was held by a person of color, let alone someone with a beard and a turban.
Shift into it. So NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has been very vocal about the killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Canada. He immediately pointed the finger firmly towards India, far before the US's recent indictment against Indian national, unnamed Indian government agency member, in an assassination attempt against Gurpwant Singh Panun. So, what is your view on who's behind Nijjar's killing, and what evidence were people citing to say very conclusively that Nijjar was killed, or to justify their suspicion on the front?
Yeah, so I mean, to be clear, Jagmeet Singh wasn't the first one to mention this. I mean, we heard it from the Prime Minister,
Of
right? The
course.
Prime Minister stood up in Parliament and made a statement that credible evidence existed. And for the wider community, this is a validation of what we've known and felt for decades, right? This is something that the community has been observing and experiencing since the 80s. So much so that books have been written on the topic. It isn't really a secret, right? It's actually been kind of a secret out in the open that India runs a lot of intelligence operations and invests significantly into undermining and compromising Sikh people in diaspora and the Sikh community in Canada. So this has been something that's been intimately seen, felt, understood by the Sikh community in Canada. And the Prime Minister's statement represents the first time that those concerns had actually been publicly validated, right? And again, for evidence in regards to Hardeep Singh Nijjar's assassination, that obviously hasn't come to light yet, even though the government has said that there is credible evidence. We'd have no reason not to believe that the Prime Minister would be, obviously speaking the truth there, because it's not, politically expedient for them to pick a fight like that with India, right? They're a massive market and a huge potential trading partner, and that potential is actually the reason why I think Canada has actually been quiet for a long time in regards to everything that India does, right, and the type of interference that India commits. So for the Prime Minister to look beyond that and finally make the statement, I think that is pretty clear that there is going to be credible evidence coming out on that topic. Beyond that, as far as what's come out in the U.S. and that particular indictment, it seems like there was a perfect storm of activity and a lot sort of bubbling in the background, right? So on the one hand, you had the assassination take place in June. And around that time, there was, all sorts of things happening in the States, and, the people involved with that separate plot to assassinate Gurpatwant Singh Pannu in the States, being arrested, for that, during that period. But none of it really came to light until months later. So we're kind of seeing a perfect storm of all of these activities that were actually coinciding, only coming to light now.
Sure. When Trudeau made this statement, I certainly will say that we would have different levels of faith towards CSIS. I'm definitely a lot more skeptical. But transitioning into the indictment itself, when they actually make an indictment, they're willing to defend it in court. That certainly caught my eye. That certainly caught the Canfal's eye. Um, so in terms of after the killing of Nijar, after Trudeau said the CSIS had this credible evidence, you had members of the Sikh community in Canada demanding immediate action towards India. So one of these actions was demanding to cut off the 2018 intelligence sharing agreement between Canada and India. Are you in favor of this? And if so, why?
Absolutely. I mean, not just now, but even when the intelligence sharing agreement was coming into place, maybe you have to be, from some of the marginalized communities to really understand what the impact is going to be, right? We knew then that such an agreement would be disastrous for Sikhs in Canada, right? Because intelligence sharing is really just a euphemism for India extending its surveillance and oppression of Sikh people into Canada, right? So we saw it as a conduit for transnational violence. And so now, I think informally that intelligence sharing agreement is likely on hold. I don't see Canadian diplomats, rapidly engaging in intelligence sharing with India right now. That might be an assumption I'm making, but I'm absolutely in favor of Canada severing any sort of relationship that would, put India in a position to be able to inflict violence on people.
Right. So like I said, I come back to the indictment again. Canada's Justice Department hasn't laid similar charges. While Trudeau said publicly, of course, that CSIS believes India is behind Nijar's killing. Do you think that we'll actually see such charges in Canada?
I believe we will. Absolutely. I think there, is likely some amount of investigation happening before this, heads to prosecution. But, you know, making such a statement is really kind of going out on a pretty broad limb. And I don't see a way back from that, right? Because, India's bureaucracy and government tends to be highly vindictive. So there's nothing to be gained at this point by not pursuing an investigation, right? The damage is already done, in the relationship between Canada and India, and that's largely due to India's actions. But there's no real going back from that. So I don't see anything necessarily preventing an investigation from taking place and similar charges being laid in Canada.
Right. So let's speak to now to end things off really the Canadian political class's response to Nijar's killing and the chances of seeing what you view as justice coming to pass. What do you think are the chances of that?
Mhm. Well, in regards to the political class's reaction to the killing and then the subsequent announcement, it's really problematic seeing a number of ex-politicians and opposition leaders just lamenting the damage to the relationship with India, right? That this is some sort of huge screw up that the prime minister has created by calling out India in this way. And it's problematic, I'd say at best, but at worst, it's almost violent because a Canadian citizen was murdered on Canadian soil. And any politician that is lamenting the relationship or harming the relationship with India, you really have to ask them, like, what would you do in that position? Would you allow, like foreign powers to come in and just start killing, your citizens without saying anything because you want to prioritize what trade relations, diplomacy, right? Not having any awkwardness at G20 meetings. So it's really problematic, those reactions, and I think a lot of them are driven more by political expediency than actually, frankly, humanity or any sense of justice in this situation.
Right. Okay. Well, Mr. Dhaliwal, thank you for taking the time to speak with the Canada Files.
All right, thank you.